You set your phone face down before the meeting starts. Not because you're hiding something, because you stopped needing to check who noticed you were quiet. Someone across the table asks why you've gotten so hard to read lately. You feel the old version of you reach for an answer, something that would make the silence comfortable again, something that would explain you back into a shape people recognize. And then you don't say it. You let the question sit there, unanswered, and you watch the slight discomfort cross their face before you simply move on to the next item on the agenda. That discomfort is not an accident. It's the sound of a door closing. A door you used to leave open for anyone who wanted to walk in and rearrange your decisions. You didn't slam it. You didn't announce it. You just stopped holding it open, and one day you noticed it was already shut. You can't even remember the exact day it happened, which is how you know it was real. The things you announce rarely last. The things you simply stop doing, quietly, in the background of an ordinary week. Those are the changes that hold. You've been closing doors for a while now, without naming what you were doing. This is what it looks like when you finally name it. One door at a time, starting with the one you walked through the most. There was a door called explaining yourself, and you walked through it 1,000 times before you ever thought to close it. Every choice you made came with a small speech attached. Why you left early, why you said no, why you didn't post about the thing you were proud of, why you didn't take the call. You handed out justifications like they were currency, like your decisions weren't valid until someone else had stamped them, signed off on them, nodded along until you felt permitted to have already done the thing you'd already done. You remember a version of yourself standing in a kitchen, explaining for the 3rd time why you weren't drinking that night, watching the other person's face for the moment they'd finally accept it. That moment never satisfied you. It just bought you a few more minutes of approval before the next decision required its own defense, its own little courtroom, its own jury of people who hadn't asked to be one. Marcus Aurelius spent his nights writing to no one but himself, in a tent surrounded by men who answered to him, and yet still demanded nothing from him in the way of explanation. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." He wasn't writing it for an audience. He was reminding himself that the moment you start needing the room to agree with you, you've handed the room your mind, and a mind that's been handed away doesn't belong to you anymore, even if your body still walks around as if it does. You start to notice how much of your day used to be spent narrating yourself to other people. The justification at dinner, the disclaimer before the opinion, the apology before the boundary, the footnote before the favor you said no to. None of it made you more honest. It just made you slower and louder and tired in a way that had nothing to do with the actual work of living. A tiredness that came from defending a life instead of living it. You close that door quietly. You make the decision, and you do not attach the speech to it anymore. The first time you do this, it feels like withholding something, like you're being rude by omission. It isn't rude. It's just the absence of a habit that never served you in the first place. A habit that was never about honesty, only about needing somewhere safe to put your discomfort. You don't owe the room your reasoning. You just owe yourself the follow-through. There was a door called needing someone to agree first. You'd float an idea, watch faces, and adjust before you'd even finished the sentence, softening it in real time, based on a flicker of doubt you thought you saw cross someone's eyes. You weren't testing the idea. You were testing whether it was safe to want something without permission, and most of the time, you decided it wasn't, and you let the idea fold itself back up before it ever had a chance to breathe. You think back to every plan you shelved, not because it was wrong, but because nobody in the room lit up the way you needed them to. You handed your own conviction over to people who were never going to carry it for you anyway. They went home. The plan stayed in your head, untouched, waiting for a vote that was never going to come, because the room was never actually voting. You were the only one keeping score. Epictetus, who spent the early part of his life owned by another man, and the rest of it teaching people who were free in name only, said it plainly. No man is free who is not master of himself. And he didn't mean freedom from circumstance. He meant freedom from needing the room, because a man who needs the room's approval has simply traded one owner for a dozen invisible ones, all of them unpaid, none of them responsible for what happens to him. You start small. You begin one thing without telling anyone you've started it. No announcement, no countdown, no audience waiting to see if you follow through. You just begin, in private, and you let the work itself be the only witness for a while. You notice how much energy you used to spend managing other people's reactions to a plan that hadn't even happened yet. Energy that could have gone directly into the plan instead. It feels strange at first, doing something nobody is watching. Then it feels like relief. The thing either works or it doesn't, and either way, it was never up for a vote. You stop pitching your life to people who were only ever spectators in it. Somewhere around this time, you start noticing how much of your peace used to depend on whether other people's words landed gently. Someone's comment could live in your head for hours. A tone in a message could rearrange your whole evening, send you back through a conversation looking for the exact word that tipped it. You mistook that sensitivity for depth, like feeling everything intensely meant you were paying closer attention than everyone else, like the volume of your reaction was proof of the size of your character. You remember replaying a 5-second exchange for an entire afternoon, building an entire case in your head for why the other person meant it the way you took it, drafting a response you never sent, defending yourself against an accusation that was never actually made. You were the only person in that argument. It never needed two people. It only ever needed your attention, and you gave it freely, every single time, like the argument was owed something just for existing. Seneca, writing to a friend about anger, said that the greatest remedy for it is delay. He wasn't telling people to suppress what they felt. He was telling them that most of what feels urgent in the moment is not actually urgent at all. It just arrived first. And arriving first is not the same as mattering most, no matter how loudly it knocks. You start letting the comment exist without responding to it in your head. You let the tone be whatever it is, without building 3 paragraphs of internal defense. The strange thing is, the moment stops being so loud the second you stop arguing back with it. You find that most of what used to wreck your evenings was never the event itself. It was the 2 hours you spent rehearsing your response to it, hours you can never get back and were never going to be paid for. You don't owe every provocation a reaction. You only owe yourself a clear head by the end of the day. There was a door called waiting for the right mood. You used to treat motivation like a permit you needed before you could start anything that mattered. No motivation, no movement. You spent years confusing how you felt with what you were capable of doing, as if your nervous system on a given morning had any real authority over what your life actually required of you. You think of all the mornings you sat with the right intention and the wrong mood, and let the mood win, telling yourself you'd start when it felt different. It rarely felt different. It just got later, and you got better at explaining the delay to yourself in increasingly convincing language smart enough to fool you, which is the only audience that delay ever really needs. Marcus Aurelius woke up most mornings not wanting to. He wrote himself a kind of pep talk into his own journal, reminding himself that he was made for the work ahead of him, mood or no mood. He didn't wait to feel like an emperor before doing the work of one. The work came first. The feeling, if it came at all, came after, trailing behind like something that had to catch up. You start doing the smallest version of the thing on the days you don't feel like it. Not the full version, just enough to keep the thread from breaking. You learn that the mood usually shows up after you've already started, not before, and that waiting for it backward was the entire reason it never seemed to come on time. You stop treating your feelings like a weather report you have to obey. You just walk out into whatever weather there is. You used to want people to know you were working on yourself. The quiet effort behind closed doors felt incomplete unless someone saw the closed door and asked what you were doing behind it, unless the discipline had a witness somewhere to make it count. You catch yourself, more than once, doing something good for yourself and immediately wanting to mention it somewhere, to someone, just so the effort would count. As if it didn't count unless it was witnessed. As if growth needed an audience to be real. You notice how quickly the satisfaction faded the moment someone acknowledged it, like the acknowledgement was the only part that was ever real to begin with, and the work itself was just the excuse to go looking for it. Seneca told his friend Lucilius that he wrote to him not to be seen as wise, but because writing forced him to examine himself more carefully than he would alone. The point was never the letter. The point was what the letter made him face when no one else was reading over his shoulder, when there was no performance left to give, only the page and whatever was true. You start keeping some of your effort to yourself. Not all of it, but enough that you remember what it feels like to do something purely because it matters to you, with no one else in the room to confirm it mattered. You notice the effort doesn't get smaller when no one's watching. It gets steadier, like it was never really for them in the first place, just performed for them out of habit, a habit you're slowly unlearning one quiet act at a time. You stop needing a witness for your own becoming. Somewhere in all of this, you notice the way you used to measure your progress against everyone else's highlight reel, as if there were a single clock the whole world was running on, and you were somehow behind it, always behind it, no matter how fast you moved. You'd see someone your age further along and feel the floor tilt slightly, like their pace was proof of your delay, like the calendar had quietly turned against you while you weren't looking. You remember scrolling past an announcement that should have meant nothing to you, and feeling it anyway, a small collapse in your chest that had nothing to do with your actual life and everything to do with a story you'd built about where you were supposed to be by now. You weren't behind. You were just comparing a private struggle to a public summary, which is a fight you were always going to lose, because nobody posts the version of themselves that's still figuring it out. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself constantly that the universe gives each person exactly what is suited to them, at the time, suited to them. He wasn't being passive about it. He was refusing to let someone else's timeline become the measure of his own discipline, refusing to let a stranger's pace dictate the worth of his own steady, unglamorous progress. You start closing the tabs, literally and otherwise, that used to feed you someone else's pace as if it were a verdict on yours. You measure yourself now against the version of you from 6 months ago, nobody else, because that's the only comparison that was ever honest, the only one with access to the full story. You stop running someone else's race and calling it falling behind. The hardest door was the one you built the most elaborate architecture around. Every failure had a reason attached. Every missed promise to yourself had a story that made it forgivable. You weren't lying exactly. You were just protecting a version of yourself that couldn't survive without the protection, a version that had gotten very good at sounding reasonable. You remember the exact moment you stopped believing your own excuse, mid-sentence, hearing it out loud for the first time instead of just thinking it. It didn't sound like a reason anymore. It sounded like a habit wearing a reason's clothes, dressed up just well enough to get past you one more time, the way it always had before. Marcus Aurelius wrote that it is in your power to wipe out every troubling thought at once and immediately be in calm. Not by explaining the thought away, by simply refusing to let it run the rest of the day, refusing to give it the next 6 hours just because it showed up uninvited. First thing in the morning, you start looking at the excuse directly instead of living inside it. You don't punish yourself for having made it. You just stop reaching for it the next time. The strange part is how much lighter you feel the day you stop defending yourself to yourself, like you've finally stopped paying rent on an apartment you moved out of years ago. You don't need a better excuse. You need to stop asking for one. And then there was the door you didn't even know was still open, the one called needing the last word. You used to feel an argument wasn't finished until you'd said the thing that proved you right. Even hours later, even in your head, long after the other person had moved on with their evening, their dinner, their entirely different night. You needed the ending to belong to you, even when no one else was still standing in the room to hear it. You think of every disagreement you carried home, replaying it, sharpening your unsaid response until it was perfect, for an audience that would never hear it. The other person was asleep. You were still arguing, alone, in a conversation that had technically ended hours ago, but that you refused to let go. Epictetus taught that some things are within your control and some are not, and that the peace of a Stoic comes from knowing exactly where that line is. Whether someone else understands you, agrees with you, or gives you the ending you wanted, that line sits clearly on their side, not yours, and no amount of replaying the conversation moves it an inch. You start letting conversations end without your final say. Not because you have nothing left to say, but because you no longer need to be the one who said it. You notice the silence afterward doesn't feel like loss. It feels like space you didn't know you had. Space that used to be filled with arguments that were never really yours to win. You stop needing to win arguments that were never yours to finish. Somewhere along closing these doors, you notice something nobody warned you about. People around you get quieter around you. Not because you've become harder to talk to, but because there's less for them to push against. You used to give them so much to work with. The explanations, the need for approval, the reactions, the waiting, the performance, the comparisons, the excuses, the need for the last word. They could find their way into any of it, some thread to pull, some opening to walk through. Now there's just a door, closed, and you on the other side of it, doing the work without commentary. Someone will call this cold. It isn't. It's just the first time in a long time that your life isn't running through anyone else's permission first. You're not avoiding people. You're just no longer asking them to co-sign your own decisions. No longer handing out keys to rooms you've finally learned to live in by yourself. You're sitting somewhere right now, maybe with your phone face down again. Maybe in a room with people who are waiting for an explanation you're no longer going to give them. There's a door near you, the kind you've walked through 1,000 times without noticing it was even there. It's still open. It's been open for years, actually. Propped open by some old habit you stopped questioning a long time ago. A habit so familiar, it stopped looking like a choice. You don't have to slam it. You just have to notice your hand is still holding it for someone.